Welcome back to the Talking Archive. My name is Josh Jacobs. We're talking with Randy Merkin. He's the author of the book Behind the Scenes, Stories from a Sports Radio Producer. And I also want to thank Rick Kaempfer from Eckhartz Press, who helped me get this interview. So shout out to Rick there. That's the publisher of Randy's book.
Yep.
And he's also...
He's the one who reached out to me to write the book. Like, it was, because I was doing these stories on Twitter during the pandemic. And after like the third story I did about guest booking stories, he said, these stories are great. These will make a great book. I know someone who could help, hint, hint. And then I DM'd him and said, I'd love to do a book. I've always wanted to write one, but I have no idea how to do it. And he said, each story is a chapter. And I wrote like 5, sent them to him. He said they were great. And then spent like the next year writing all the stories, editing them, and then we had the book.
That's great. Now, did you have an editor? Did you do the editing yourself, or how did that work?
So it was, I would write write a story. These are all based off guest booking stories that I've had, or experiences in my illustrious long broadcasting career, and I would send them to my wife, who's a Spanish teacher actually, but is excellent with editing. And she would edit, each story. We would once we compiled 10, we would send them on to Rick, and then Rick would, put them all together. And then we did have an editor from Eckhartz who went through them. Now the problem was the editor; she wasn't a huge sports fan, so she edited stuff and didn't need to be edited. So we actually changed back some of the stuff she edited. But that was it. There was an editor, but basically my wife was the main editor of the book.
That's great.
Yeah.
Well, and then having, being bilingual also helps as well, that in a way that those of us who are not bilingual can't really understand, I guess.
Right, exactly. Yes, very true, very true. Yep.
And how many stories do you have total in the book?
So I think there's 90 in the first book. I'm writing the second one right now, actually. I divvied it up between, college athletics, and golf and football, basketball, celebrities. There's a taste of everything in there, I guess you could say. And it's kind of cool because it kind of spans the whole career from my days at Sporting News Radio to, my days at ESPN. And how different it is when you're at a local station. It's basically all about the local teams, but when you're at a national sports network, you're more you're more focused on just booking national guests, and you have so many more opportunities, I guess, to book big guests because there's so many different, teams that you're covering.
Oh yeah, definitely. And when you were at WLS radio, was it talk radio or sports radio? What was the format then?
No, it was talk radio. It was they carried Rush, and I think they had 1 or 2 local shows, but a lot of it was network radio. I'm trying to remember in the morning, maybe I can't remember. They might have had a local show in the morning, and then they went to Rush was their bell cow, and then after that, I think they had a local afternoon show.
Oh, okay.
But yeah, there wasn't a ton of people around. I did a lot of marketing stuff for them, so it was fine. It kind of opened my eyes to radio itself, so it was good. I think it was after my junior year. Yeah, so junior year of college, so kind of opened my eyes to what was coming.
Oh, yeah. I worked with somebody who worked with Larry Lujak who was on LS for many years. Of course, before that, Super CFL. He kind of went back and forth depending on who was offering the bigger contract.
Right. Yeah.
And then a couple months ago...
He had Animal Stories, right?
That's right, with little Tommy Edwards.
Yep, absolutely.
In fact, that was my first internship was with Oldies 93, CBS FM out here, and Tommy was the program director there for about 10 years. And
wow.
He'd been the Chicago Bulls PA announcer before that.
Yep. He was great.
He was, yeah. And I haven't talked to him in years now, but I hope he's doing well. I heard Lou Jack passed away a couple of years ago.
He did,
unfortunately.
Yep.
Did you ever get to meet Lou Jack and Tommy?
I never did. No, I never met Larry Lou Jack, no. I didn't meet Lynn Bramer, who just passed away as well from WXRT. I'd always wanted to meet him because he's a big sports fan. Everyone loved him and said how nice he was, but I didn't meet him either.
It's kind of weird because, you hear people on the radio and you think, oh, they've met everybody. Then when you find out that they never met, somebody really famous, or you're kind of shocked sometimes about that.
Right. Yeah, I mean, like especially in sports radio, you're kind of in your little bunker. It's like you don't really like venture out past like the sports radio scene. So that's probably why I didn't meet some of these other guys. But yeah, I would have definitely liked to meet both those guys. Huge icons in this industry.
Yeah, and when you worked behind the scenes beginning in your career, especially with gathering sports highlights, how did you do that? I mean, today you have various television and even internet feeds, but back then, of course, there wasn't all that high technology. How did you gather those clips back then, and what did you record them on, and how did you send them out if it was in the situation of the network feed situation?
Well, we just, we had back then. I don't think these exist anymore. It was called a coupler line.
Mm-hmm.
So you would just call, like, if you wanted to roll on games, like, for instance, I produced the NFL show that we did every Sunday during the season, and you just call the stations and ask for a coupler line, and that's like just a phone line, and you dial in and you get the game. So we would have a guy doing production would have 6 or 7 lines going, and he would just have to pay attention to what all the games were going on and try to catch it. If not, you'd roll on the halftime show to make sure you got the highlight there. And then everything was rolled on reel to reel back then. And then you would cut it up and put it on a cart. And then you would play it. And then I was the producer, so I would get all the highlights on carts. So that's basically, and as it advanced, I think towards the end, definitely towards the end of when I was at Sporting News. I left Sporting News in 2007. We were definitely rolling off internet feed, off the feeds.
Mm-hmm.
But no, when I first started in '94, there it was everything was definitely through coupler lines, and then it obviously changed over the time. And like affiliates never really called for the sound; they just would take whatever we had if they carried the program. But that's basically it. I mean, it's changed so much now. Obviously, it's so different. But yeah, back then that's how we did it: coupler lines, reel-to-reel machines.
Now, when you started One-on-One Sports in 1994, which eventually became, of course, the Sporting News Radio, what was missing in sports talk, which you and your fellow founders provided?
Well, I wouldn't say anything that was missing. We were just a good alternative, I think. At that time there was, I believe, there was two. ESPN Radio was the king back then. And we came along, and we had a lot of growing to do early on. And I think the toughest thing about working at One-on-One Sports and then Sporting News Radio was that early on we always had to explain to, if we were trying to get credentials or trying to book a guest, who we were, because a lot of times people didn't know us originally.
Mm-hmm.
I think One-on-One Sports was really big in like college towns, like Tulsa, like Oklahoma, Cincinnati, Ohio, Memphis, Louisville. We were huge in Louisville, and I know that because like college coaches would sometimes sing our jingle to us before they came on, like they were excited to come on. And Jim Harbaugh one time in a bar sang the jingle to us. So, yeah. But I mean, like, we just, we had different kind of hosts, and early on we didn't have great hosts. I'll be honest. Like when I first started there in 1994, it was a very small operation. We didn't have a ton of affiliates, so oddly enough, I think we were on in Philly, but like we were not on a ton of big markets, and so we weren't getting a ton of phone calls. So it was a lot of filler for our hosts to do back then. But eventually, we got better behind-the-scenes people to come on board, more investors. We started going everywhere. Like we were at every major event, and I think that helped out a lot as well. And we had some really talented people who are still in the industry and doing amazing things. Like it was the group we put together. Like it's like the greatest people I've ever worked with. It was just so much fun. I always felt like we were, an uphill battle, but everyone loved it. It was like people just wanted to stay there. It was a great run. I mean, I don't think there was anything that was missing at the time when we started, but I just thought we were a great alternative to ESPN Radio, which was, really good product. But I think we just provided a little different taste of how we covered sports radio.
Who are some of your most memorable personalities when you were at one-on-one?
You're talking about hosts?
Hosts, yeah. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I mean, it all starts with Papa Joe Chevalier, who, was like just the ultimate sports fan host. Just took calls, Bite Me Wednesday, if you wanted to give a bite me to a sports figure or a sports team. He did the thing when there was the lockout, I think, in '95. Mm-hmm. He asked for fans to send in their baseball cards, and they were going to shred them all. And I was like, oh, that'll work well. And we must have received over 15,000 cards.
Wow.
Yeah, and we put them through a shredder. And I think it was written up like USA Today. I think SportsCenter may have done a story on it. He was great. Like, he was like the first guy. Like, he was like just the best. I always thought he was, just a great sports talk show host. I worked with two phenomenal guys who taught me more about the industry than anyone else I've ever worked with, and that was Bob Berger and Bruce Murray, and later Bob Stelton. They were, just that. And that's when I was doing weekends, which was my favorite spot there. It was, we would do around the NFL, where you'd have all these stringers calling in from all the games, or the college football show, which you had stringers from each week you'd have to find stringers in these, small college towns. But those guys were great. It was just, there were so many great people that worked there behind the scenes and on the air. But, I'm just thinking off the top of my head, Papa Joe was great. We had Steve Zabin was there for a little bit. He's a really talented guy.
Oh, yeah. I worked with him at Fox Sports Radio for a very, very short time.
Yeah, really talented guy. I used to produce the show with Mark Jenskow and Jay Mariotti, and, Jay is a little out there, but that was always a fun show to produce as well. I learned a ton from Mark as well. But, the main guy, like, I always thought, like, the main guy at 101 Sports and Sporting News that really was like our guy was Papa Joe.
His baseball card demolition kind of reminds me of the 1979 disco demolition that Steve Dahl did. That must have been some sort of inspiration for that.
Yeah. No one thought it was going to take off. It took a life of its own that night. Yeah, but that definitely is a good comparison. In
fact, the Sox had to forfeit the second game because there was so much ground vinyl on the.
Yep.
On the ground.
Yeah, that's exactly.
You weren't at that game, were you?
I was not. No, I was not there. No.
Okay.
Yeah.
Had to ask.
Yes.
This is the Talking Archive. My name is Josh Jacobs. We're talking with Randy Merkin. He's the author of Behind the Glass, Stories from a Sports Radio Producer. And next time we'll find out how Randy moved from Sporting News Radio to ESPN 1000 in Chicago.